just stopped on the way to say to Peter Costello, you never would have given them $7 million. Look, firstly, to you, Nick, thank you for those very kind words, but more importantly, for the work that you do in helping to make this institute a reality and the work that you do to promote and preserve the legacy of Sir Robert Menzies. It's greatly appreciated. I have a few acknowledgements to make first too. To Peter Costello, Australia's longest serving Treasurer. He often reminds me, Josh, 10 budget surpluses, only 2 deficits, to which I reply, well, Peter, you had 0 pandemics, so there you go. To my very good friend, Richard Alston, Brendan Nelson, Stuart MacArthur, Phil Baresi, former Senator Margaret Reid. To my current colleagues and great friends, Education Minister Alan Tudge, Katie Allen, Tim Wilson, my ministerial colleague Jane Hume and Senator James Patterson. And of course to former Premier Ted Baillieu, to Lady Primrose Potter, to Charles Good, and can I echo the words, Charles, of the wonderful leadership that the Cormac Foundation has provided in support to the Liberal Party, and to all the members of the board who are here. To former Presidents Ian Carson, Michael Kroger, Federal Directors Brian Loughnane. There's a list of Liberal luminaries who are here tonight, and it's wonderful to be with that family. It is my great pleasure tonight to officially launch the Robert Menzies Institute at the University of Melbourne. But before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the presence in the room of Diana Menzies, and in her absence, the indomitable and wonderful Heather Henderson, who due to health reasons has remained in Canberra. Heather carries her father's light and radiates her mother's warmth. She is very much the soul of the Liberal Party, and many of us here have been the beneficiaries of her friendship and her encouragement. And tonight we very much send her love. I would also like to acknowledge in this company and pay my respects to a Liberal great, former party leader and Menzies' successor in Kooyong, Andrew Peacock. He was a friend to many in the audience tonight and made a lasting impression on the Liberal Party and on the country, and he will be sorely missed tonight. Andrew would recall many interactions he had with Sir Robert, but one I'll never forget, when he told me that he once gave a speech and Sir Robert was in the audience. And after he delivered the speech, he said to Sir Robert, "What did you think?" And Sir Robert looked at him and said, "Andrew, your speech was both brilliant and original." Andrew was pretty happy with himself until Sir Robert said, "The problem was the brilliant bit wasn't original and the original bit wasn't brilliant." A very good anecdote that reminds us of Sir Robert's wit and Andrew's self-deprecation. Friends, Winston Churchill once said, "History will be kind to me because I intend to write it." These are prophetic words for us, because if we in this room don't take responsibility for preserving and promoting the story of Menzies, his detractors will, blurring his legacy and the important lessons it provides. This is why we meet tonight, to honour a great Australian. This is why we seek to protect his legacy. And this is why we all commit to doing all that we can to ensure that his values endure. And this is why the creation of the Robert Menzies Institute is so important. Its mission is our mission. And I quote, "To uphold and promote Sir Robert's legacy and vision for Australia as a country of freedom, opportunity, enterprise and individual dignity. The Robert Menzies Institute is now the 6th Prime Ministerial Research Centre in Australia, and I congratulate all those who have had a part in bringing the Institute into being, and many of you are here tonight. I acknowledge the distinguished board members of the Institute, Sue Baker, of course, Chair Lee Clifford, Peter Credlin, Ian Harper, Jeff Hone, and of course, the party's honorary historian, David Kemp. And I also want to recognise the Institute's inaugural CEO, Georgina Downer. The Downer family is synonymous with the Liberal Party and public service. I had the honour, once upon a time, to work for Georgina's father as Foreign Minister, and we used to play the occasional tennis game. But I have to say, as a doubles partner, Alexander Downer made a very good Foreign Minister. It is truly fitting that the Robert Menzies Institute be located at the University of Melbourne. And tonight I acknowledge the support and the presence of the university's 22nd Chancellor, Alan Myers QC. Alan follows in the footsteps of Sir Robert, the university's 13th Chancellor. Sir Robert once said a good university chancellor was one that knew, quote, something of the qualities and something of the oddities of politicians, and at the same time enjoy wide respect from people, many of whom have never been in a university at all. Sums up Alan perfectly. Sir Robert had a profound connection to the University of Melbourne. He first entered the Melbourne Law School in 1913, was elected president of the SRC and editor of the Melbourne University magazine. In 1916, he graduated with a Bachelor of Laws, and in 1918, he completed his Masters of Law. A quarter of a century later, he was bestowed with the university's first honorary degree of Doctor of Laws. Today, we see Robert's influence in so many places at the university. He formally opened International House, the Baillieu Library, St Hilda's College, extensions to Queen's College, Whitley College, as well as opening Mackackie Court at Ormond College. As Prime Minister, he visited often, and what is apparent is that he loved the place. After Sir Robert fulfilled his service as our nation's longest-serving Prime Minister, he returned to the university in 1967 when he was appointed Chancellor. The University of Melbourne was part of the architecture of Robert Menzies' life. The giant who shaped 20th century Australia was himself shaped at the university. At the School of Law, he learned more than the structures of law. He absorbed the intellectual foundations of modern and free societies: human dignity, mutual respect, personal responsibility, civic-mindedness, responsible and accountable government. He grasped the importance of enterprise, risk-taking and reward for effort as the fuel that propelled the growth and the prosperity of Australia. He understood the life force of free societies and private enterprise is actually truth. The willingness to challenge, to engage and explore ideas in the pursuit of a better world. Born of his experience here at the University of Melbourne, he also understood the centrality of universities to the intellectual and moral core of nations. As he said when accepting an honorary degree at Queen's University, Belfast in April 1941, and I quote, "The freeing of the mind from the inhibitions of ignorance is one of those great moving forces that distinguish the civilised world from the uncivilised world." Later that same month, in 1941, he was awarded an honorary degree at Bristol University. The Chancellor was Winston Churchill. These weren't ordinary times. Bristol had been bombed and life in Britain was hanging in the balance. Menzies said upon receiving the degree, "Our city may lie in ruins, our university may have had its great hall destroyed, but the university goes on, not because the university is a building or a set of buildings, or even a body of graduates or undergraduates, but because the university is the home of that search for the truth which is part of the stuff that is the free spirit of man." Menzies' actions were true to his beliefs. After he returned to the Prime Ministership, that vision transformed Australia's universities. In his words, a university is a home of research, a trainer of a person's character, a training ground for leaders, and is the custodian of mental liberty and the unfettered search for truth. These are enduring things. And in January 1966, after a total of 18 years as Prime Minister, Sir Robert was asked in his final days as Prime Minister about his most lasting achievements. He named just three. First, he said, the creation of the Liberal Party. Second, he said, the establishment of the ANZUS Alliance. Third, he said, the development and expansion of higher education in Australia. As we meet to launch the Institute tonight, we also must remember the man himself. Menzies' civility, his values, and his deep sense of conviction offer a roadmap for the modern-day politician. The society he wanted to live in was one that afforded dignity for all and both the freedom and the opportunity for each person to be the best that they can be. In my mind, this is what liberalism is all about. It's powerful, it's good, and it's right. Menzies understood that politics should be a battle of ideas and not a clash of warring personalities. He was, by every measure, the most successful Australian politician in our history. Yet he didn't equate civility with weakness. His civility, his capacity to separate his opponent from their argument, his ability to laugh and to have a sense of proportion, created the emotional space in his being that meant that politics wasn't corrosive to him. This was the secret to Menzies' longevity. And his politics wasn't corrosive to others either. He would say that his goal was not to destroy his opponents, but to defeat them. He treated the public service with dignity and respect, always in search of, and in the language of the day, the best man, not a yes man. He too was not afraid to share friendships across the aisle and to defend them if challenged. Once, when he was in state politics, the Liberal Premier, Sir Stanley Argyle, tried to dissuade Menzies from becoming friends with Labor's leader, John Cain, to which Menzies replied, "Mr. Premier, I accept your direction in the affairs of government, but I take orders from no man on how I choose my personal friends." Later in his career, Menzies would enjoy a warm friendship with his Labor counterpart, John Curtin, a relationship that proved resilient even in the most testing of times. Menzies and Curtin, and then Menzies and Chifley, conducted hard-fought campaigns. Yet Menzies was a pallbearer at both of their funerals. Menzies saw politics as a calling, a vocation far different to any other role. Never motivated by a quest to make money, He was lured by the nobility and the art of politics, despite his love for the practice of law. When he first told his mentor, Sir Owen Dixon, that he was leaving the bar to enter politics, Dixon replied, "It's quite easy to make a good lawyer into a politician, but reconversion is impossible." But it was Menzies' conviction, his principles, and his understanding of the power of the individual vis-à-vis the state that makes him the standard bearer for liberalism and our great Liberal Party. His vision was clear. The individual and his encouragement and recognition is the prime motive force for the building of a better world. Governments, he would say, have their part to play. They may regulate, they may distribute, but they do not create. And therefore, what happens to private enterprise is of vital importance to the people of Australia. It is, in Menzies' words, the salary earners, the shopkeepers, skilled artisans, professional men and women, farmers, who were the forgotten people at the heart of the economy and who, with families, were at the heart of our nation. He was the champion of their cause, but importantly, he asked for something in return. Nearly 2 decades before President John F. Kennedy would utter similar words, Menzies said in a radio broadcast in May 1942, and I quote, "The great question is, how can I qualify my son to help society? Not, as we have so frequently thought, how can I qualify society to help my son?" He wanted government to look more to the citizen and the citizen to look less to government. This was Menzies' guiding principle, and he would say, if you stand on principle, you will never go far wrong. While the era during which Menzies governed was very different to the one we live in today, his values and his principles have never been more relevant. In the pursuit of his convictions, he left a better, stronger and more secure nation behind. And as we reflect on the challenges we face today, I want to draw 3 parallels tonight with the Menzies era. First, his belief in liberty and the pursuit of freedom inexorably tied to the notion of personal responsibility. He understood that there would be times of crisis in the life of any nation. Those times would require extraordinary things from ordinary people. But importantly, those times had to be temporary, not permanent. As Menzies said to the Parliament, following the declaration of war in September 1939, and I quote, "Our institutions of Parliament and of liberal thought, free speech and free criticism must go on. It would be a tragedy if we found we had fought for freedom and fair play and the value of the individual human soul and won the war only to lose the things that we were fighting for. To win and not lose what you're fighting for." That is why tonight I wanted to talk about the overreach here in Victoria. Sir Robert Menzies would be appalled at the pandemic bill now before the Victorian Parliament. The same Parliament that, as Attorney-General, he once sat in. Described as draconian by the President of the Victorian Bar Council, the bill makes permanent, unfettered pandemic powers. Checks and balances integral to our Westminster system have been removed and replaced, according to Victoria's leading QCs, by a blank cheque to rule by decree. A pandemic should not be the cover for a permanent expansion of executive power across our lives. To do so betrays the trust of millions of Victorians who have done the right thing as they've endured the longest lockdown in the world. I want Victorians to be able to get on with their lives, to make their own choices, to go to the park with their kids, to sing at their local church, to have a drink with friends, to hold their grandchildren, and to open a business. These are not criminal acts, these are human acts. Now is the time to restore people's freedoms and not curtail them. Secondly, Menzies understood the complexity of international affairs and the utmost importance of protecting our national security. When he re-established and reinvented our post-war relationship with Japan against heavy opposition, he chose to pivot Australia to the future and not to the past. He understood that Australia's place in the world was always with like-minded friends. Friends who valued human dignity, freedom of speech, the ballot box, and a belief in national sovereignty. Menzies' record here is simply remarkable. The treaty with Japan, the establishment of ANZUS, the Southeast Asian Treaty Organisation, the Colombo Plan, and his understanding of sovereign capability as a fundamental tenet of national security. A legacy that to this day remains essential to our security and prosperity. Modern equivalents, including AUKUS and the Quad, championed by Prime Minister Scott Morrison, build on this legacy by recommitting Australia to working as a reliable ally of the United States and the United Kingdom and a trusted strategic partner with India and Japan across the Indo-Pacific. As Menzies said in January 1950, and I quote, "Geographically, Australia is next door to Asia, and our destiny as a nation is irrevocably conditioned by what takes place in Asia. It is therefore in Asia and the Pacific that Australia should make its primary effort in the field of foreign relations." His remarks continue to explain where our interest lies and what we must do to secure them. Australia is a country of 26 million people, not large by world standards, so we must be a country that makes and keeps friends and continues to build sustainable relationships and alliances. And thirdly, when it comes to the economy, the centrality of the private sector, not government, Menzies had very strong views of harnessing individual aspiration and hard work. This is what he understood delivers economic prosperity. It's not to say there is no role for government. Having lived through 2 world wars, Sir Robert understood that government has a unique responsibility in times of crisis. In his words, among the true economic functions of the state was to assist in preventing the periodic recurrence of large-scale unemployment. In a similar vein, when I spoke to John Howard just days before JobKeeper was announced, he told me, "Josh, at times of national crises, there are no ideological constraints." When Australia faced its biggest economic shock since the Great Depression, we did what was required. More than 500 individual measures, none more important than the economy-wide wage subsidy JobKeeper that supported 4 million Australians and around 1 million small businesses. Partnering with the banks, landlords, regulators and the Reserve Bank, we pulled the country back from the economic abyss and saved a generation from long-term unemployment. Robert Menzies deeply believed in the dignity of work and the pursuit of full employment. In the aftermath of the Second World War, with the extraordinary post-war economic boom that this brought, full employment had finally been achieved in Australia. After peaking at almost 20% during the Great Depression, the unemployment rate under Menzies fell to below 2% in the early 1940s. Throughout his entire 16 years as Prime Minister, from 49 to 66, the unemployment rate in Australia remained at an average of just 2%. As Henry Ergast has observed, in 1 month in 1951, the number of registered unemployed in South Australia was down to only 3 people. It's okay, I'm reliably informed none of them were downers. For Menzies, full employment was not an abstract economic concept or a political slogan. In his 1962 budget speech, Menzies described it as the desired end of a great cooperative effort throughout the country, an effort in which action is productively directed and people are productively employed. We understand, just as Menzies did then, that the foundation for a strong economy rests on individual aspiration, reward for effort and free enterprise. And as we emerge from this crisis, we embrace these principles and now have an opportunity not seen for decades to drive unemployment down even further. And reflecting this building momentum in the Australian economy, growth in Australia is forecast in the coming year to be up to 5%. Unemployment forecast to fall to 4.25% by the end of next year. This is below the most recent estimates of what is known as Nehru or full employment. Record investment coupled with strong private sector balance sheets is propelling the recovery, and we have good reason to be confident about our future. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, in retirement, the man we honour tonight, Sir Robert Gordon Menzies, reflected on his life in politics. And he said, and I quote, "The whole world was in front of us. We had a continent to serve, a continent to lead, and a continent to inspire." More than half a century on, Sir Robert Menzies remains our inspiration. And it is through the Robert Menzies Institute that we officially open tonight that the next generation of Australians will have the opportunity to learn more about the life and legacy of one of the greatest Australians of all, Robert Menzies. Thank you very much.